That's a very good question. We've had the same question ourselves, the organizers of this event, because it happened last night. Green Party is the only party that showed up. And tonight, again, the Green Party is the only party to show up.
They know what's happening.
They've been warned, they've been told, they've been provided, if they can't show up, they've been provided with the questions so they can provide answers to the questions, and I would be reading them, but we have not received a response from any of the candidates at all.
No, in about 15 minutes. They're leaving.
So I can, my understanding was, Doug, you're the one communicating with them better than I have, or more frequently than I have.
Here.
Yeah, so I'm Doug Beckett. I'm the individual who sent the invitations out initially back in July to the 4 parties that were listed at the time, plus 2 of the candidates directly who on BC Elections BC website had their email contact, and I put in the names of 2 additional candidates. Since then, I've been communicating directly with the candidates that we informally knew were likely to be running, and with all the candidates that formally got listed on Elections BC website list. So they've all been communicated to many times through email, inviting them. Some I even met one-on-one with some candidates leading up to this. And some of the candidates, either they or their managers indicated they weren't going to come. I was always hopeful that they would, but part of the democratic process is they may or may not come, depending on whether they want to reach out to the electorate. So I did what I could, and I am disappointed, but we had a wonderful forum yesterday with 1 candidate. I think we'll have the same today. I'm anticipating at least 2 candidates tomorrow, and I'm hoping with that, we'll actually have a full slate, but time will tell.
And that's exactly what we did last night. We just limited to, we still were using the questions though, so we can focus the points to what we wanted to hear, right? As I said, we're here to talk about ideas and concepts and policies around energy transition. So power generation, electrification, that sort of stuff. So, we understand there's lots of other issues in this election, but so trying to narrow it down for this, so this doesn't get too expensive. So with that said, James, I'll leave it the floor to you to introduce yourself, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Gil, and thanks for organizing us, Doug, and your team, and all the fact checkers, and Anne for participating in this. And I'm as disappointed as you guys are that I'm here by myself. I guess we can say that it's part of the democratic process that these candidates may or may not come to these forums. But I mean, I would suggest if you want to run for office, that's kind of your obligation, is to come to these things and stand up to public scrutiny. I'm willing to do that. And unfortunately, the competitors in this riding and yesterday's riding for Gwen decided not to do that. I think it's a very strange election that we have. I have never seen anything like this before with the parties, one major party folding the way it has. And yeah, so anyway, I'm happy to throw my hat in the ring, and I think that was kind of one of the big inspirations for Gwen yesterday for why she decided to run. Was just that this is almost an issue of democracy at stake, and having a clear choice in this election and knowing what people stand for. Oh, there she is right there. Thanks for coming, Gwen. Gwen was in yesterday's debate. She absolutely killed it. And by the way, Gwen is the most qualified candidate on all the ballots and all the Prince George ridings by far. Check into her history. So yeah, I grew up in Prince George and grew up on a cattle ranch out in the middle of nowhere. We actually didn't have power out there. So I have a little bit of experience with the energy transition. You know, we grew up off grid, no television, no phone. We had a radio phone, and to talk to people, you had to like everybody else could listen. You'd have to get privacy. You'd ask the operator for privacy, and they'd beep out half the conversation, but everybody else could hear you still. And then that went away, so we had no phone service. So to communicate with my parents, if I was in town, I had to like leave a message for them on the radio. I don't know if you guys remember that, but there's the messages for the outlying areas. So you'd actually call the radio station, CJ. What was the country radio station? 620. Yeah, CJCI, and they broadcast your message for all the world to hear. And then I went to school at Beaverly Elementary School there. My dad worked at Clear Lake Sawmills, so that we'd go there, and there was the community there, and we'd hop on the school bus there, and that would take us into town. So I rode the bus quite a bit. Yeah, I went to Beaverly with, I think you went there too, Pamela. Yep. So did you guys. And then I went to College Heights High School. And then I left town. I went to Vancouver. I studied at SFU as in political science, history. I wanted to be an archaeologist. That was the first thing I did, but I couldn't get into the program. And I've got into history. So that's what I did. And it seemed like an easy gig, right? You just read the newspaper and be up to date on current events and write papers on political stuff. After that, I went into, I did a graduate degree in public policy also at SFU. And as a legislative intern, I learned tonight that Kyle Giddens was also a legislative intern. It's a really neat program where you get to go into the legislative assembly and work with the political parties, and then you get shuffled around to the bureaucracies, and you learn a whole bunch about how government works. And then worked for the NDP as a researcher. Officially, I worked for the Legislative Assembly, and kind of got out of that game. I got tired of sitting in front of a computer all the time. I worked for the labor union movement, wrote newsletters about regional government, and then I started a woodworking business. And basically, I'm running out of time, but that's basically kind of my career in a nutshell. And I've done some activism stuff on the side.
Thank you. So we'll Moses get into the questions in, and we'll see what you have to say. So I've organized my questions. There was a number. You were received 13 questions. You've seen them. You should have did some homework, whatever. Be ready. So I've organized them how I've seen them. I saw more of a societal or policy rating. The other one transport, and the other one is more like power. So I'm going to start on societal. Start with those. And so the first question is going to be, if elected, what would you do with respect to the carbon tax on gasoline, and would you make it easier to switch to electric vehicles?
So I think, fundamentally, if you're creating something that's bad, you should pay a tax on it. I agree with the fundamentals of a pollution tax. The problem I had with the carbon tax, I don't know how many folks read my columns. I kind of did a few columns on this. A couple of issues. One of the issues is it's a tax that a lot of times you can't really avoid, right? It's like we've created this society where we're locked into these patterns of transportation and logistical realities where we're transporting food long distances. And there's no way around the carbon tax in a lot of cases. So, as a society, I think we've got to look beyond just simply taxing carbon. We have to figure out, well, how are we locking people into these choices with things like municipal zoning? How are we building our cities that requires us to drive an automobile everywhere? How is it that, we're importing food from halfway around the world when we could grow the exact same food of better quality right here in Prince George? Why do we have a dairy in Smithers that ships raw milk, all the way to Chilliwack or Abbotsford to get put into bottles, and then they ship it all the way back to Prince George? Like, this is insane stuff, right? And a lot of this has to do with rules that the government has set up one way or another over the years, who have basically come to be about protecting large corporate interests, large monopolized kind of business holdings. And this is pervasive in our society. So it's not just about taxing people for carbon. It's how do you encourage people to reduce their carbon impact through basically the infrastructure of our society. I'd love to maybe chat a little bit more about this. Maybe I'll tie it into the next question, but I think I'm out of time.
You're good. So I asked this last night from Google, and then I look at this as the paradox question. So and it basically goes to this: both federal and provincial energy policies enable expansion of fossil fuel extraction and use, while also making commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Hence the paradox. So if elected, how will you and your party deal with this contradiction?
Well, a great way to avoid kind of addressing that contradiction is just to ignore all of those trains of coal that are being exported offshore, right? We don't count that when we add up our carbon emissions in this country. That's somebody else is burning that stuff, so we'll put the onus on them. But we're happy to supply all that. So I mean that's I think at the heart of the paradox is maybe we should consider what happens when you base your economy and expand your economy based on carbon extraction. There's so many different ways I think that we can build our economy and succeed. And instead it's the easy money, right? It's the easy path. You can pull this oil out of the ground and sell it to somebody else. There's a huge demand for it globally. And then we can tell ourselves that, hey, if we don't do it, somebody else will, right? Russia will provide the solution to that. It's a huge problem that we face as societies, as humanity. But at the end of the day, I think we need to do the right thing and move to this transition, because let's be realistic. What's going on out there in the weather, what we're seeing, the change in the climate is crazy. I don't think we're really appreciating what's in the pipeline here. I mean, in my house, I don't think we've had a frost yet. This is the 2nd of October, right? I don't think it's being below freezing. This is unheard of. Okay, last winter we never had snow for a huge chunk of the winter. Like just mind-boggling that we would expand the fossil fuel industry. I think that kind of hopeless, but I guess that's why I threw my hat in the ring, and I want to be the voice. I want to be the person that would like to stand up to that industry. Unfortunately, I have competitors in this race who actually worked as lobbyists for the fossil fuel industry. Kyle's not here to defend himself, but he's not pointing out to the public. I got a red card, so I got to stop. I'll bring that up again.
Finish your thought there.
Well, he's not pointing out to the public that he's on the lobbyist registry 29 times lobbying for TransCanada Energy. And that's something he did between 2021 and 2023. I think that he should be advertising that to the public. I can't find that information anywhere in his election literature. And, you basically made your career for the last couple of years lobbying government to reduce taxes on the fossil fuel industry. That team, the TransCanada Energy team, played a big role in undermining the carbon tax, right? They were the ones that convinced the NDP to create huge cuts in the carbon tax for the biggest industries. So us little folks, we still got to pay the same amount of carbon tax, but they provided huge cuts to the big industry where they're basically being exempt from paying carbon tax for 30% of their emissions, because these industries are quote unquote in trade exposed industries. And this was a huge campaign that this lobbying company or group did, and this actually became part of a national scandal. I don't know if folks read the story in the National Observer. No, not the National Observer, sorry, the Narwhal. Matt Simmons reported this back in June, whereby this corporate lobbyist by the name of Liam Iliff was caught on tape bragging about how they undermined the regulatory process to get all these big wins for this oil and gas industry. This was reported in the National Post. This guy has since denied that he had any influence on government, but basically he bragged about the fossil fuel industry writing ministerial briefing notes for ministers. So this is like industry writing information for our public servants. This is a huge, huge betrayal of trust. And the Attorney General actually did a little investigation and said nothing happened. This guy was just bragging. He wasn't telling the truth. He didn't have that much influence on government decisions. But if you look at what happened with the regulatory framework around the fossil fuel industry, a huge tax cut happened. And, that's something I wouldn't stand for. And, if that was my job, I certainly would not be proud of it.
All right, thank you. Next question. If elected, how will your party balance respecting Indigenous rights and title over lands and resources with the increasing pressure to source materials to enable the energy transition?
Indigenous rights and titles are core to the Green Party platform. I think a lot of people forget that, I talked about this on the radio today we had a 2-hour radio show today. We never signed treaties in British Columbia. Okay, this guy called Trutch, he was the premier back in the 1870s, and he said, we don't need to sign treaties, and totally contradicted the basis of English common law, which was respected across the rest of Canada. I'm sure everybody knows about this history. But at the end of the day, we never signed treaties, and that needs to be respected. The BC Conservatives are talking about ripping up UNDRIP and not respecting its history. Like, the courts are going to win, the rule of law is going to win, and good luck trying to fight that. The one thing that I think we need to watch out for is the power imbalance, where we have big corporations taking advantage of this situation to manipulate small First Nations bands or small communities to get what they want. And that's something that we always have to be cognizant of. And at the end of the day, there's going to be downstream impacts of doing these big mineral projects, of doing big logging operations. And just because you have a right to exploit something doesn't mean that you can pollute and affect somebody else's right downstream from that.
All right. So switching over to more of a transportation side now. So the first question on that is, California is the jurisdiction in North America with the highest number of electric vehicles and charging stations. On a per capita basis, however, the uptake in BC is often greater than occurring in California. If elected, what will you and your party do to help maintain this leadership in BC?
The Green Party is basically all in on electrification. If you look at their platform, they want to expand the infrastructure for electric vehicles. I was reading your newsletter there, Doug, last night. I did do my homework. I think we've got 5,000 charging stations in BC now. That's one for the fact checkers up there. And the Green Party wants to see more of that infrastructure put in place. I think the number of electric vehicles on the road, and this may include as well hybrids, but I think we've got 170,000 electric vehicles or hybrids on the road in BC. So then I think that's gone up about 4 times in the last 8 years. So yeah, there's a tremendous growth in electric vehicles on the road, tremendous advances in the technology behind electric vehicles. I had Doug on my radio show there a couple months ago, and I learned all sorts of stuff about how good these things work in the cold weather. You can turn on the heater and you got warm air right away. It's not like those out-of-date diesels that, you got to warm them up for 15 minutes. And you can get good range on these things nowadays. So there's all sorts of developments and advances in electric technology, and it's the way of the future, and the Green Party's all in on that.
Okay, so in keeping with that, the current BC government is committed to having 10,000 public charging stations in operation, effectively doubling the number of public charging stations by 2030. Will your government maintain this commitment?
I don't want to make a commitment for these guys. I didn't read that in the platform, and I'm just a little guy up in Prince George. I'd have to reach out to them and ask that, but I'm pretty sure that that's something they would be committed to. Personally, I would be committed to that.
So now moving into a little more of a power side now, I'm gonna go to the obvious one for everybody or for a lot of people is so there are many options for generating more electricity. There's gonna be more electricity required in this province, quite a bit. There's some like my own calculation says you need to almost double the generating capacity in this province to have life stay the same without and to get rid of fossil fuels. So with that in mind, do you support maintaining the current ban on nuclear energy production in BC?
Yeah, so in BC, we've got actually, if you look at the demand actually stayed pretty stable over the last 10, 15, 20 years. So a lot of times BC Hydro has these pretty incredible increases in electricity being predicted, and it doesn't really come to bear in reality. And a lot of that has to do with technology. Everybody's switching to these LED lights, more energy efficient homes and industry. You know, there's also a lot of electricity being used for things that we shouldn't really be using electricity for. So I was pretty shocked to learn that we use about 273 megawatts of electrical capacity mining Bitcoins in this province. And to put that in a context, Site C Dam is, you know, it says it's got about 1,000 megawatts capacity, but that's only like when the water is running full blast.
900. I guess they said 900 now, but
So in
I don't-
reality,
I don't-
it's in reality the capacity is around 500.
Yeah.
So we're burning about half of Site C, what Site C produces just for Bitcoin mining. So we've got a plant here in town at Iris that are energy, and they've turned old sawmills into Bitcoin mining operations. Artificial intelligence. This will also create a huge burden on the electrical system. And the amount of power that's required to run these AI models is just phenomenal. I think we have to have a discussion about, you know, what are we using all electricity for, and is that a valid use of that electricity? Now, as far as nuclear power, the Green Party is not committed to nuclear power. That's not in the platform. Neither is hydrogen, for that matter. And hydrogen, you know, like the Fortescue plant here in Prince George, hugely inefficient operation. That would have used twice what Site C produces. And they're thinking 200 jobs there. So we spent $20 billion on a dam that would provide half the power that this operation needs. So, you know, talking like 100 employees for 20 billion bucks doesn't sound like a great use of public money. Nuclear power, you know, there's some technology there. There's actually a kid here in the hallway, a physics student at the university, kind of schooled me on nuclear power. It was pretty, oh shoot, I got the red card. Sorry. He said there was some cool technology that might actually be able to reuse the fuel to the point where there's no more dangerous fuel waste. But I mean, that's always been a concern of mine with nuclear power.
All right. So just for the audience, just so we throw some numbers down, the total generating capacity in this province is around 10,400 megawatts at this time. So you can do the ratios for the numbers he was using earlier. Next question then, where did I put it? So currently 98% of the power generated in BC integrated grid comes from clean or renewable sources, making BC a leader in North America when it comes to clean energy. If elected, what will you and your party do to help maintain this leadership?
The Green Party wants to see a lot more solar power generation. We want to see more community kind of focused power generation with solar panels, and we want to see an expansion of like the net metering program. One thing I learned about a few years ago was in BC Hydro had a program where you could put solar panels on the roof of your house, and if you had surplus power, you could put it back into the system. You get credit for it. You get actually paid for that power. And then what people were doing was they were ending up actually turning it into a business and putting a bunch of solar panels on their house and actually more than that they used and getting money back. So in 2019, BC Hydro changed the policy to basically make it illegal for you to produce more power than what you would use in your home, which I thought was a very regressive policy. You know, I thought we should be encouraging that. Like, why would you limit the amount of power that you can produce from solar panels on your own home? If you want to, you know, make your home into this crazy solar farm, why not? Like, we need the power. Let's empower people to provide the power. And apparently they just changed that. So now they've changed, I forget, there's a new name to it, but we will have the option once again to actually put more solar panels on your house than what you can consume, what your load of your house is. And I think that's a positive step. I think I'd like to see more of that. I'd like to see more, make it easier for people to get power generation. I think rooftop solar is a huge opportunity. You know, out on the farm, my parents, they've got solar panels. They work great. You know, there's this myth that solar panels don't work in northern climates. In the winter, when the sun's low, sure, they don't do a heck of a lot. But if it's sunny in the winter, you still generate a lot of power from that thing. And in summertime, like you can go for days and days and days without running a generator to charge the batteries. So yeah, I'm a big fan of solar, and I think there's a lot of opportunities there to use that to increase power production. I don't want to see something happen like the Fraser River being dammed. That was the plan at one point back in the 70s. They were going to dam it down, I think, above Lillooet. back the water all the way up to Williams Lake. You know, I can't believe we built Site C. I think that was pretty crazy. And we're using half of that to mine Bitcoins now. So anyway, there's some things that I'd like to see changed as far as the decision making and power production, and kind of the culture in BC Hydro might be a little problematic as well, as far as accountability and transparency, that kind of thing.
All right. So the next one, so we're basically sticking with carbon emissions here. So if your party is elected, how will you lower British Columbia's carbon emissions over the next 4 years?
Well, I think like a lot of carbon emissions are being created in forestry. So I think there's some opportunities. I don't know if that's part of your calculation there, but forestry definitely creates a huge amount of carbon. And I think there's a lot of practical things that we can do to reduce the carbon emissions from logging. I think we can, not to put on my stop the spray hat here, but you know, the fastest carbon sequestering tree that we have in a forest is trembling aspen. If we legalize trembling aspen in the working forest and we let a lot more of those trees grow, we'd suck up a huge amount of carbon. We're talking like 500% more carbon. If you did more selective logging, you could reduce some of the release of carbon from the forests. Not everything dies when you leave some trees in there. The mycelium network can survive when you've got surviving trees, and actually aspen roots can maintain a whole bunch of the mycelium. So having aspen and healthy aspen in your forest can really protect that side of things. I think having a more local food production, having more local economies, I think where we manufacture more stuff in Canada and rely less on all these crazy imports. I mean, the stuff in our houses, the clothes we wear, this is all made offshore. This is a huge carbon input to bring this stuff to Canada. But I think food is another big one. I think, as I mentioned earlier, you know, we could keep some of that milk here in town. We've got breweries with stainless steel equipment. They know how to put liquid into bottles. It's not rocket science. You know, it has a lot to do with government regulations that prevent it from happening. So, you know, I think getting more local dairy production, beef production, like we ship beef out of that's grown here in Prince George. We ship the stuff to Alberta, gets processed in one of 3 huge processing plants that dominate the slaughterhouse industry in Canada, all of them owned by foreign corporations. We should be doing that beef processing right here in town. There's a lot of practical things we could do. I mean, it doesn't have to be technology dependent. It could just be refocusing how our economies are made, and maybe moving away from that globalized kind of trade structure that we've fallen into in the last 50, 60 years.
All right. In keeping with more in the environment side again, climate is warming and extreme weather patterns are causing more frequent floods, droughts, landslides, and wildfires. To what extent do you believe transitioning from carbon-based energy to electricity and other forms of green energy will help slow down global warming and extreme weather events?
I mean, what we do in BC isn't really going to amount to much, right? I think we got to be realistic about that. But it's just about doing what's right. And you know, same with, you know, when we talk about, well, how do you move away from this oil industry when somebody else is just going to be pumping the oil if we don't? I mean, you can't look at it that way. You have to look at it just as an altruistic kind of what's in the interest of our kids. Like how do we, what would you do just if nobody was watching you do something, right? You have to be that kind of person. And yeah, it's a tricky one, but we have to do what we can, and we have to show leadership. It's not just about reducing carbon emissions. I think in forestry we can do a lot of stuff too. I don't know, let's throw some things out that folks might not know about, but in Europe they did a study of deciduous conversion from broadleaf trees in Europe to conifer forests in the last 200 years. Just based on how much darker the surface of the earth became from doing that. Deciduous trees like aspen are a lot lighter colored than conifer trees. And by replacing all those deciduous forests with conifer forests, the planet absorbed way more heat because of that, just in Europe, to the point where that was equivalent to burning 7% of all fossil fuels to date. That's a huge huge amounts. So, fighting climate change isn't just about reducing carbon in the atmosphere. It's also about albedo effect of our planet. What are these massive landscape-wide things we're doing that could help cool the planet? Growing more aspen and forestry, that's a big one, which nobody talks about.
All right. We're screaming along here, so you know earlier tonight, which is fine. So, but next question is compared to the rest of the globe, BC has a unique advantage with 98% of its electricity already being generated from clean renewable sources. Even so, only 19% of BC's energy is provided by electricity, with another 11% provided by biomass and 7% by fossil fuels. If elected, what will your party do to decrease our reliance on carbon-emitting biomass and fossil fuels?
I mean, I think I don't want to bore the audience too much with repeating everything I said, but
Yeah,
I think basically relocalize our economies, get more local food production, get more solar on the roofs, expand the electric vehicle fleet. Just a few comments on electric vehicles. I think, one of the things I don't want to see is the electric vehicles just becoming the realm of like the elite and the wealthy. We have to make sure that electric vehicles and the electrification of the economy benefits everybody and it's accessible to everybody. I'm not sure exactly how we accomplish that, but it's just something that I think is missing a lot of the discussion when we talk about electrifying the economy. But yeah, there's a lot of work to there. Those are a lot of work to do. Those are big numbers. When you talk about 70% being of the energy being consumed being fossil fuels, a lot of that has to do with heating our homes with natural gas and transportation, right? So how do you reduce transportation? How do you get people to drive less? How do we, stop sending stuff from all around the world? Like, why are we importing garlic from China when we could grow it right here in Prince George? These are all things that we forget about, we don't talk about, and I want to bring those to the table, and I want to, excuse me, I want to talk about that. I'm also, I don't know, wood heat, I think, is maybe worth talking about. My riding that I'm trying to get elected in is a big riding. There's a lot of people that use wood heat. I think that's maybe the biomass numbers there, but personally, I think wood heat is a better option than natural gas. It's a better heat. You can, I don't know, cheaper. I've got natural gas in my house. I never use it. I just burn wood heat as much as I can. Get an energy efficient stove that burns clean. And yeah, I think it's an alternative to fossil fuels. It's carbon neutral. A lot of people don't realize that. But, if the wood is if it's an old pine tree that's going to rot away anyway, if you burn it in your house, it's not really going to impact the climate other than the fuel from your chainsaw to cut it up.
all right. I'm going to make this the last question for the evening, and then we'll open up the floor to anybody who wants to ask questions and some statements from you after the fact. So last question is: the use of fossil fuel contributes to fine particulates, medium particulates, and all sorts of chemicals into the air we breathe. If elected, what will your party do to reduce airborne pollutants caused by burning of fossil fuels? That kind of goes when you talk about heating with wood.
It's such a tricky one. I've got a dirty old diesel pickup, which I probably shouldn't be telling people as the Green Party candidate, but it's also one of the most fuel efficient vehicles on the road. Like I get 25 miles a gallon it's an old 12 valve Cummins engine, and they've upgraded the emissions controls on these things. You got DEF fluid and chips in them that make them burn cleaner, but actually they're way less efficient. These new diesel motors, they don't get the mileage I get. So on one hand, some of this technology is about reducing emissions from these motors, but on the other hand, you lose fuel efficiency and you're creating more carbon pollution. Which is to say, I mean, we've got to move to a different form of driving our vehicles. And I think electric is a phenomenal technology. You can't really beat it. You got less moving parts in these vehicles. They're easier to maintain. You don't have to change oil all the time. We just got to basically keep developing them, make those batteries better. One thing I learned about was tire dust. That might be an issue that electric vehicles aren't going to solve. But tire dust is actually really toxic. There's a chemical in tire dust that was killing fish in Washington State that they discovered, and something that needs to be addressed. It's like a preservative in the rubber or something. But potentially electric vehicles might actually create worse tire dust. So there's always complicating factors to consider.
All right. Well, thank you for taking the time here and just we're screaming through some of these, but and I'm open the floor to anybody who wants any questions in relates to energy transition and
Let's get this thing, let's spice it up here. Ask me some tough questions. You know, I'm here to be scrutinized by you guys, and I know it's a boring event without the competitors here, so fly at it. It's whatever you guys want to talk.
In regards to the mining of Bitcoin, which government agency has the authority to authorize that or to give that person, that company, the license to do that? And number two, how many employees are out in that building there? What are their wages like, and how can we get rid of them?
Yeah. I don't have all the answers to that, but I do know BC Hydro authorizes that power consumption, and they put a moratorium on Bitcoin mining, I think a year ago, and they actually got sued by one of the companies, and I think that lawsuit is ongoing in court. But actually, they that's where we learned about the 273 megawatts of power consumption being used for Bitcoins was that court case. I haven't followed up on that to see where that's at. As far as the number of employees, very few. Right, I think there's probably some upfront, setup costs and construction jobs and setting up a place like that Iris plant. But long term, I mean, there's not very many people in there, probably a dozen maybe at most. And they're establishing these Bitcoin mines all over the place. They're being established in old sawmill sites. I believe in the Kootenays, I think there's a couple of Bitcoin mines in the old sawmills down there. I heard maybe Mackenzie was going to get one. I'm not sure about the status of that. And Gwen, yesterday, the Green Party candidate for Prince George Valemont, you were talking about data centers, so not just Bitcoin mining, but data centers in being set up on oil rigs or natural gas well sites, and just basically using the natural gas to run generators and using that to power some of these operations. And they're probably doing Bitcoin mining that way as well. How do we get rid of them? BC Hydro could probably do something about that. Maybe they, for starters, they're getting industrial rates of power, right? So they're paying less for the power than we pay as residential users. They're paying 6.3 cents a kilowatt hour. So we could maybe look at the rate and make sure that that covers the marginal cost of electricity production.
Sorry, I think just very recently, the provincial government took the power to license or not license those Bitcoin and cryptocurrency maps, and that was, I assume, that they intended to approve some and not others. But at least I have never seen what the criteria is. But I believe it's sitting now with the province.
Thanks, Gwen.
My question is, this is the second night now that this thing happened. Why was the manager here? Why is this group continue to cater to these people and their flyers out there when they're not even here?
I said the same thing. I said, we got to get these flyers out of here because if they're not going to show up, why do they get to put their flyers out there?
Oh,
Yeah, so when I was contacted by one of the managers of some of the candidates, they indicated the candidates weren't going to come, but they asked if they could have a written statement read at the beginning of the forum. We said, sure, you can have a written statement, you can have the 4-minute opening statement, you can prepare answers to the questions, which you already have, and provide them. You can have literature on the tables outside, and they very politely provided some literature for the tables, which I greatly appreciate. The more information, the better.
I'm with you.
Saying that they would not attend and could not attend. It's two different things.
I can't remember the exact wording, so don't quote me exactly. And if that makes a difference, talk to them directly to find out, not for me. Thank you.
Sorry, I'll get to your question, but I just want to ask a question from Zoom as well. There's people online. So there's a question from Lorraine Lavalley who asked, would you be comfortable explaining why you changed from NDP to Green and also what you see as a main shortcoming of the NDP climate change plan?
Happily answer that question. So I worked for the NDP in 2006. And when I was in the legislature there, I had the opportunity to actually work with Bruce Ralston. He was admitted the finance critic at the time. So these guys were all in opposition. And just to be frank, like I wasn't really inspired by what I saw. There were some internal political dynamics going on in the NDP at the time. And they had some really good candidates in the caucus that represented a change from the 1990s NDP. So I was actually in the caucus there in 2005, and it was just Jenny Kwan and Joy McPhail. So this is kind of ancient BC political history. But when there was only two members of the opposition, the NDP got absolutely destroyed in 2000. And it seemed like this opportunity for the NDP to kind of rejuvenate itself. And what happened was all these old NDP hands from the 1990s kind of came out of the woodwork in the 2006 election and basically took took control of the party again. So, you know, the same the same group that was behind the disaster of the 1990s NDP got back into power. So this is John Horgan, Adrian Dix, Mike Farnworth, you know, some new guys that were kind of affiliated with them, Bruce Ralston, for instance. And there's one of the reasons I got out of there. I could have stuck it out and I probably would be like a ministerial chief of staff or something right now had I stuck it out, but I didn't really want anything to do with the party at that point. I got out of there. I did help out with a few NDP elections after that. 2013, I think I door knocked here in Prince George up in the heart. Because I had a friend who was running a campaign from the NDP days, but I got out of politics and got out of the NDP politics back then. And certainly in the last 7 years, when they got into government, I had big hopes that they would ban forestry spraying. That never happened. I was incredibly disappointed with them. You know, they even told me things like, hey, we'll talk to you after this election. And then they don't talk to you. Meanwhile, the Green Party were bringing that issue up in the question period, right? And they were the ones taking the leadership on this issue. And I saw the leadership that Sonia Furstenau brought to the table when she became leader. And yeah, I mean, long story short, the NDP lost my trust, and I saw the Green Party as a new way forward to address some of the major issues. And also, there's like just fundamental priorities that the Green Party is committed to, like a commitment to local democracy. Like none of the other parties really believe in that. It's not really one of their founding principles. And local democracy is a big deal for me. I think, you know, having been in Victoria, having seen how this political kind of insider class down there runs the show, made me really realize that to get anything done up here, we need to have control over the decisions that affect us. So, you know, a good example is the Ministry of Forests. You've got the forestry office on Aspika there. We've got a district forest manager who's appointed by Victoria. Right? Why isn't that person accountable to the local people who are affected by that person's decisions in the forests? Northern Health. You know, this is a huge institution with an unelected board. And they're spending like $300 million of our local tax dollars on the hospital expansion. And there's no local accountability for those tax dollars. The regional hospital district authorizes them to take that money and spend it on a new parkade and surgical tower. But there's no oversight over how that money is being spent. So if there's another epic screw up with the parkade, which we've had experiences with here in Prince George, there's no accountability. And Vancouver's too big, right? Like we're just 3 MLAs up here. We're not a big deal to Victoria. So we've got to relocalize a lot of the decision making. We got to relocalize the institutions that are accountable to the public here. And you could do that a number of ways that aren't that complicated. You know, we've got a regional district. We could make that a little bit more powerful. We could make that a little bit more directly elected and give them more authority over things like who the district forester is, for example. Food, a lot of the food regulation stuff. You know, we've got this thing called a vegetable marketing board that have just brought in a bunch of regulations on how vegetables are marketed in northern BC. And this is a group of producers basically that's dominated by agricultural interests out of the Lower Mainland. And now suddenly they have authority over who gets to market vegetables to local stores here in Prince George. You know, we didn't have that authority. Nobody had authority over us to do that a year ago. Now suddenly they do. And it's like, we can't do anything about it. So, you know, the Green Party really stands up for some key core principles like local democracy that I really believe in. And yeah, I was happy to have the opportunity to represent that vision here in this election and run for the BC Greens.
First off, I want to say thank you for being the only one to actually show up here today. Second off, my question is about nuclear power with wanting to decarbonize our economy. While nuclear waste is an issue, the efficiencies and changes in technology regarding nuclear reactors have made them safer, more efficient. I want to know what your personal stance is on nuclear power and energy, and if it may be a bit short-sighted to just completely write it off from like Green Party's stance.
I think there's technology that is in maybe it's not necessarily like fission, but like fusion technology. There's been some advancements in fusion, and correct me if I'm wrong, fusion's like the sun, right? Is that fusion or is that fission? That's fusion. So, you know, hot fusion, like where you like replicate what's happening in the sun, that there's been some advances in there. I remember, I'm old enough to remember the cold fusion craze of the late 80s. There was this guy called Fleischmann and these two scientists called Fleischmann and Pons who came up with this reactor that basically did a nuclear reactor at a fusion reactor at room temperature. Turned out to be a bit of a hoax, but there's still people looking into it. So there might be breakthroughs in that kind of technology, that kind of side of things. There was mentioning that the UNBC student in physics who I talked to here in the hallway, and he talked about these patents that Canadian firms have on nuclear technology that reuses the waste from reactors and can keep reusing that waste down to until it's no longer toxic nuclear waste product. You know, that would be good to develop that kind of research. And I think that would be one of the disadvantages of not having nuclear power is that you couldn't kind of have these sort of other research programs associated with that. You know, when COVID hit, it kind of drove home a big thing for me, which is like, what happens if something like COVID happens again and these nuclear reactors can't be manned with people? You know, like what happens if all of a sudden we shut down society because of a pandemic that's worse than COVID, which is absolutely a real thing that could happen. We know that. What happens to these nuclear reactors? Can they just operate without people there? That's one thing. And then the other thing is the waste, right? Like the way that we have the nuclear reactors right now, that their nuclear waste is a big thing. How do we deal with it long term? You know, what if civilization as we know it, you know, and if you look at the climate, there's a good chance that this may come to pass where modern technological civilization isn't what it is today. And what happens to the people who don't have the technology to deal with this waste 100 years from now? So these are things I think about. But yeah, go ahead. You had your hand up again.
Active war zones going on, they're able to keep those reactors safe and operational, and there's automatic shutdowns in cases, you know, places where there are no people able to operate these reactors. When it comes to safety in that regard, I do believe it is a major advancements from the nuclear disasters of the 80s.
You're a fan of EVs for the poor people. The federal government has just doubled the price of cheap EVs being produced in China. Would you advocate subsidizing Chinese vehicles so you, by paying half the cost of bringing them over to Canada? Or would you decide you want to be local and build EV producing plants in BC and mine all the lithium here so that it's all local and you're not importing any EVs?
Great question. Man, I don't know if I have a great answer to that. I mean, yeah, they produced a phenomenal EV, right, in China for very low price, and now we want to put a tariff on it to protect our EV industry slash conventional vehicle industry. Is that basically what's happening? You know, it's a tough one for me because like when we put in that tariff on the furniture that was coming in from Vietnam, to me that was a good thing because you look at like the stuff you can buy on Wayfair, it shows up at your door for less than what you'd spend shipping the equivalent chair to Vancouver with Canada Post. Like I don't know how they make it for that price, how it gets here for that price, and it just destroys your local furniture making industry. Right. So it's a pretty tricky one. I don't really have an easy answer for you, and certainly probably not something that you'd like. But I mean, if I can buy a chair and I can't even buy the lumber for the like a fraction of the cost of the chair, something's not right. Like, so I don't know what's going on with these Chinese vehicles and these EV vehicles. Like, why are they so cheap? Are they being subsidized by the state over there? What are the factors that make it so cheap? And so I think you don't want to rule that out right away, but I think you have to ask those kinds of questions when you bring in a tariff like that. And can we replicate it? Is there a chance that we can create an EV industry that could compete with it? And if we can't create anything close to it, and it's got all these other benefits to decarbonizing the economy, then that's a fair point. Maybe there shouldn't be a tariff on something like that, but I don't know all the details about that. But it does raise some interesting questions. I think, philosophically, I want to see more stuff made here in Canada. I want to see more self-dependence on our own resources. As far as lithium mining, I'm not sure what the deposits on lithium are in Canada. Uh, I'm led to believe maybe there's an alternative to lithium. There's other kind of technology and batteries that might be around the corner at some point that won't require lithium. Hopefully, I don't know. Do you know anything about that? Or feel free to jump in. If not, don't worry about it. But sodium batteries. Sorry if that. You want to ask me another one? Go ahead.
I don't want to sit here and drive my opinion or facts upon you.
Go
I
ahead,
want to
Go ahead.
invite you to tell me what you know or what you believe should happen.
Say again.
I'm here to invite you to tell me what you know and what you propose and what your opinions and policies are.
Thanks.
So I think we've gone through almost an hour. So I know time flies. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you have a closing statement to make any points that you want to make for your election, and then we'll go from there. And you got
It's such an unfair
couple of
advantage,
minutes?
Gil, over these other guys. I almost want to
Hey,
like.
if they're not
cede
going to
the
show
floor.
up, they don't get the opportunity, and so you get the opportunity to speak and have an open forum here to say what you have to say as a closing remark.
Also worried that you've listened to me talk too much tonight, so I don't really want to.
If you're good, if you're good with that, I'm good with that. I'm happy. So I'd like to thank you for coming out and for taking the opportunity. I'd like to thank everybody for coming to witness this and then making the effort to come here to the Camphor Theater at UNBC. And
If you guys want to chat after the thing, I'll hang around and feel free to come and chat and ask me some more tough questions.
yeah, I was just gonna say. So after we'll close this down, but we'll all remain available to ask any one-on-one sessions. And I've my own opinions on so many things, but as a moderator, I was keeping it to myself. So they but and we'll go from there. So thank you very much, and make yourselves a good evening.